It's Nirmala Sitharaman, who is the Minister of Finance and Corporate Affairs. As we've just heard, she will be playing, her department will be playing a critical role in India's energy transition, and she'll be speaking with my colleague John Reid, who is the FT's South Asia Bureau Chief. Over to you, John.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Minister, for joining us. Thank you all for listening. I'll start with a big question for you. How does India reconcile its aggressive goals on carbon cutting and reaching net zero with its equally ambitious economic development agenda? And are there areas where you think the international community is pushing India too hard?
Well, first of all, thank you, Financial Times, for choosing India to have this discussion on energy. I think Prime Minister Modi has led from the front in setting the agenda clear for India. And whether it was in Paris and subsequently whether it was in Scotland, India's nationally determined commitments have been very clearly stated. And if you would notice that in COP21, the commitments given were well ahead of time fulfilled by India with its own resources. So, the commitment, therefore, to fulfill our commitments, nationally determined commitments, it can be seen in the way in which we have performed. So, we've given ourselves 2070 for net zero, and we have ambitious plan, and the basket with which we are dealing is to have every energy which is non-fossil fuel based coming in and priority being given for that. So, we are clear we have a pathway, and that pathway will be very challenging because the challenges are more external than from within the country. You're clear you want to set up large plug and play energy parks where solar energy panels can be placed. Private enterprises are given incentives for coming in for that. Also making sure that newer and innovative ways of funding is tapped for it. But with all this said, I can add more, but we keep reminding ourselves in India that the emission per capita is only a third of what the average emission per capita is globally. With that said, with our drive and the Prime Minister's keenness that we fulfill our commitments, we have taken different ways of funding it, making it a part of our policy to be sustainable and to make sure that it is inclusive. So, when we talk in terms of policy being integrated, International Finance Corporation has itself recognized that India's policy is well aligned and is in alignment with the 2% temperature norms. So, we are consistent in promoting every renewable source of energy, whether it is solar, wind, and also investing in the things which have to go with it. I was just hearing the other panel talk earlier before me.
Yes.
Transmission has had a lot of investment coming in, particularly when you're setting up huge solar plants in Ladakh and you want to get them transmitted down to the valley till Haryana and Delhi border. So, the transmission lines establishing also involves money, and for which we've made budgetary provisions. I remember 2 years ago, we made the provision for this transmission line for the solar parks which are generating very high quality solar power in Ladakh. So, there are a comprehensive approach, backward forward linkages being given, and budgetary provisions made.
There's enough money.
There's enough money. In fact, I would think India is one of those which is putting money where it should be put. Only the challenges which we can't foresee and be prepared for is when you have unilateral measures like the CBAM, the cross-border adjustment mechanism which is coming, which is going to hurt our industry. I'm not sure whether it is WTO compliant, but we have been told this, well, it could be WTO compliant, but I think it's unilateral. And as a country which has proven its record, and for international agencies to have recognized that India is keeping its commitment and fulfilling it, to have to face unilateral measures like this will be the challenge for which I am not sure how we can foresee, because there's not going to be one, there can be many. But they are unilateral and are not helpful for countries like India.
When you say it's unilateral, do you see it as a trade barrier? Do you see it as...
Absolutely, it is a trade barrier. Okay. And you're putting in a tariff for what you define as dirty steel, whilst you yourself would produce the dirty steel and make sure that the money which you earn out of this is funding your conversion from dirty to green steel. And there will be that fine one morning when you would say, we are producing green steel, we don't want dirty steel to come to India, and we'll be funding that. And suddenly we realize that we won't have the money to convert ours speedily. So there are such not so helpful ways in which developed countries follow certain policies, which are unilateral and, I'm sorry to say, arbitrary.
So you said you thought it might be WTO non-compliant.
I'm not sure whether they've framed it in such a way that it's going to be compliant, but as long as you're raising barriers. Today it's a very important concern, talking about climate, talking about energy and being sustainable in your production. So you can always justify a step saying, is it WTO non-compliant, but I'm doing it in the name of, green. So I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but any such move which is so unilateral for equal products being produced, there's no level playing field. Yours is dirty, mine is dirty, we are trying to convert, you're trying to convert. Is the transition going to be punishing one another?
Right. So how might India react? Would you do a WTO complaint? Would this maybe impact the India-EU FTA talks?
I'm sure it won't be escalated to the level of hurting the talks. The FTA is an important component of wanting better trade relations. But our concerns will definitely be voiced.
Okay. And have you voiced them already, or you will be
Several
doing
times.
this? Several times. And you will be doing it again?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And I believe there is this deforestation initiative from the EU as well. Which
That's right. That is another one of the steps which can hurt countries like India, which are trying to, as it is, face the challenges of complying with the global, climate-related challenges and complying with the NDCs that we've given. But if newer, as I said, much before you're even ceased of the intensity of the CBAM, you have this deforestation. And that's going to have major disruption in the supply chain. And if you're going to be selective about who's following and complying with the Deforestation Act, I've been reading quite a few, write-ups on this. You will have major disruptions in the supply chain. And that's not going to help countries which are spending a lot on transition cost. Like India is definitely looking at ways in which transition cost can be reduced. As it is not just one item, but there are several items which are adding to the cost of getting to be greener. One of the major steps, for instance, if I can take this opportunity to explain that, is there are hard-to-abate industries, where till now we've been talking about energy efficiency. But today we are moving towards emission count. So as it is making traditional industries which have been concentrating, for a country like India, in development path being where it is, our earlier standards and measures used to be energy efficient. But now we are telling them, not efficiency, tell me how much is your emission. That itself is going to cost companies to move from that efficiency quotient to emission quotient. At this time, if I have to bring in newer constraints on myself, other than helping these companies which are moving from one index to another, funding them. But at that time, if I have newer challenges like, are you aligning yourself with the deforestation expectations that we have? it is going to cause a lot of disruption in our supply chain.
A lot of disruption and a lot of money, presumably, as well.
Both from the government and from the enterprises themselves. So on the whole, when you're looking at attraction for the economic development, the growth, you're being stifled by steps which are not going to facilitate the green transition.
So we've talked about the external challenges that India faces from its trading partners. Can we talk a bit about what you're doing in India to decarbonize the economy? You have all the levers of finance at your disposal. And I was wondering if you could tell us, are you considering expanding the incentives you offer in future? Might the PLIs, the production-linked incentives, be rewritten or expanded? Is there more money going to be topped up in that account as well?
See, at the moment, the PLI were brought in for 13 sunrise sectors, which included green energy, which included the hydrogen mission. Hydrogen mission itself had $1.4 billion US given for it. You also had PLI being given for automobiles and the advanced technology related mobile technology producers, so that the electrical vehicle funding also can be more innovative and it will be green and sustainable. That had about $3 billion US given. So budget has never constrained itself from promoting green sectors. Large industrial parks, as I said, large energy parks are being set up. Other than this, I think we are encouraging common citizens, small householders. One of the fascinating schemes which came up during the vote on account was the PM Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, which is giving a small household 300 units of electricity free, provided he keeps a solar panel on his rooftop and generates power. And if he generates more than the 300 units, he can still upload it to the grid and earn money per unit that he uploads. So not only that he gets 300 units free, but he can even earn from the units that he produces. This scheme also had a lot of support given by the budget, because you're providing free electricity to people, you're also funding them with some kind of assistance up to a certain wattage. So that was to draw common citizens to come into this program, and it has received overwhelming interest from common Indian citizens, households. 2 million applications have come. Our target is to reach about 10 million households. Already 2 million households have applied, and we are trying to install these capacities at the earliest.
Let me ask you, as the finance minister of the world's biggest developing country, when you look at the money that you have at your disposal for the green transition, how are you positioned internationally vis-a-vis like China or the US, for example? China's been able to pour, I think, hundreds of billions of dollars into subsidies.
Theirs is a larger economy. I can't really aspire to spend as much as China does. It will be relatively in proportion to what China would do, because given its GDP.
But doesn't that put India, this is a leading question, I should not do this as a journalist, but doesn't that put India at a disadvantage when it comes to developing sectors like EVs?
I wouldn't call it putting India at a disadvantage. I would give priority to have that capacity developed in India itself, indigenous capacities for electrical vehicles, and there is enough promise. Many Indian companies are coming forward with it. So we will encourage them to ensure that they are able to come up with technologies which help in mobility, and the priority of this government, and which is something which Prime Minister Modi has emphasized, that the electrical vehicles and support which we need to give through the budget should also prioritize public mobility, which means tier 3, tier 2 cities will get buses which are electrical vehicles, for which we will from the center assist the states also to receive some kind of a funding. And therefore public transport would not just be metro, which runs on electricity, hopefully it's completely green, but the public transport in terms of buses which will run in such cities will also be electrical vehicles.
So you're confident there's enough money at India's disposal
Yes,
to,
yes, sure.
to see this transition through? And are you on track to meet your net zero in 2070 goal? And are you on the
Am
way?
I on track for 2070? At least the mileposts which are before me, 2030, and then thereafter, yes, I'm on track. Because the number of specific achievements which makes me feel that 2030 will be achieved probably well in time, like the way we've done before. As I said earlier, for battery storage, we've allocated huge monies. We are looking at setting up advanced ultra supercritical thermal unit, and that is for 800 megawatts. We've come up with also a modular nuclear energy program through which the government is funding a lot of private companies also to come up with a
For small nuclear reactors.
Yes,
right?
small nuclear.
I keep hearing about these, but I don't see them yet.
Not yet. They are in the process.
On their way.
We are funding a lot of these research, and we are probably at a stage where we'll be breaking through sooner rather than later and getting
when is
this.
sooner, ma'am?
I wouldn't be able to give a date now, but we are going in that. And also this pumped storage, where hydroelectric power with pumped storage uses the same water which has generated the electricity, but because it doesn't flow away but gets stored again, and you're able to generate more power. Pumped storage is also given priority. And therefore, if you look at the various steps that we're taking for non-fossil fuel, I told you about the nuclear energy, pump storage and hydro, advanced supercritical for thermal, and solar is already something which we are talking about.
Okay. I can't not do this. I need to ask a question about domestic politics. Your government, or I should say the ruling party, emerged from this year's election in a weaker position than in its previous 2 terms. And in some instances, in the 3rd term, has had a harder time passing legislation. And my question is, pertinent to this conference, will this have any impact on India's green energy push, being in a somewhat parliamentarily, if that's a word, weaker position?
I can say for sure, till now, there's been only one session of parliament post our election, where we have come back for a 3rd time to form the government, 3rd successive time, and that's the budget session. And in the budget session, there were no severe opposition by anybody, because the issues are very well established and well argued, so it passed through. And since you're today asking me this question about weaker in spite of coming back for the 3rd time, the results which were declared yesterday for a provincial election in Haryana very clearly makes up for what is perceived as a weaker, in spite of a government coming back for the 3rd time successively, what is perceived as your numbers are weaker, yesterday has dispelled that myth. And as it is, therefore, I don't see the opposition behaving in less than what constructive opposition should behave like.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have time for one question from the audience. I think a gentleman here in the blue suit.
This is Manoj from Net Zero Think. So I have just simple question, ma'am. For India, for net zero transition, lots of study has been done. And as it is estimated somewhere in the range of $150 billion to $200 billion every year investment is needed. And currently somewhere in the range of $30 to $40 billion is being invested. So there is a huge delta gap. So how do you see this gap to be fulfilled, and how it is going to fulfill? Because for this transition we need lots of money.
I think that's the question. Yeah.
Well, we've, as I said, taken several steps. One example I will give you is where the US and India have signed an agreement whereby India would give 500 million and US Development Finance Corporation, the US DFC, would put in a 500 million. Together, they would raise an equal amount of the total that they've given both together from sovereign funds, sovereign wealth funds or market, and with that also fund greener projects. Over and above that, I think the attempt both by the government and by the Reserve Bank of India, because we came up with a framework for investments, sovereign funds or any others, green investments. And we also have Reserve Bank coming up with policy for investments and government together on the green bonds. We've created an environment where people are now willing to fund the green transition or green, greening of industry. Whether it is looking at green bonds or equities coming in the name of investment for greener, we are looking at various newer blended finance options where government also puts in money, private also comes in, or private equity partners also join in. I think the environment is right for funding green projects in India, and the sure signs that I see in the last 2-3 years tells me that reaching to 2070, if the same momentum continues, is possible.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we've run up to our time, much too short, sadly, but it was wonderful to get your comments at our event.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, great conversation there. So interesting to hear very frank views there from the Indian government about